What's worse than clicking that link that you thought was legit? Being the IT guy and installing it. So, guys, in today's episode, we're talking about RATs, specifically a malware disguised as a legit tool that's being installed by IT professionals in multiple areas. Let's talk about it. Today, we're facing an unprecedented array of data breaches, hacking attempts, and surges in digital crime. Why is there such a widespread amount, and how little is noticed in our everyday lives? Malware, dark sites, brute forcing, zero-day script kiddies, and nation-state hackers are all on the rise. Learn more about the threats we face and gain a bit more knowledge than yesterday. Hey everyone, another episode of Exploit Brokers is coming to you now. Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Laudo. I want to thank you for tuning in. If you could please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, the like, and the bell icon. If you're on YouTube, it helps the channel grow, and it's because of that that we can reach more people. If you're on a podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please do me a favor and subscribe to get new episodes. With that out of the way, let's jump into it. So guys, we're going over an article by Dark Reading. Hunters International disguises Sharp Rhino RAT as legitimate network admin tool. The RAAS or RAS group that distributes Hive ransomware delivers new malware impersonating as validly signed network administration software to gain initial access and persistence on targeted networks. That's a lot to say, but we'll kind of explain some of the concepts as we walk through it. So an emerging threat group that's made a meteoric rise to the top of the ransomware food chain has a new tool in its arsenal with a novel remote access Trojan or RAT. Not specifically the animal, here we're talking about the malicious software. The group is using the tool in attacks that appear to be targeting IT professionals, where normally you have stuff like phishing that will target average users. Granted, sometimes those average users could be IT professionals. This is specifically aimed at trying to get IT professionals to install it and infect the system, because IT professionals generally either have access to accounts that are higher privilege, or they themselves are operating in an account that is higher privilege, the admin accounts. There is best practices that can be taken, but it is what a lot of people tend to do is they use admin stuff to install stuff. So that's one downside already in the tactic that they're taking for the infection strategy, that is. So researchers from Quorum Cyber revealed in a recent blog post that the Hunters International, active since last October, is deploying Hive ransomware. Now, I'm not sure if I've covered it on the channel, but Hive ransomware is was one of the major players for ransomware. I believe they were caught, shut down by authorities, but then Black Cat and a few others were the major players up until recently. Black Cat had a bit of an exit scam recently, and now it seems that this new threat actor has taken up the Hive ransomware and kind of continuing on that legacy. So the group uses a new malware dubbed Sharp Rhino, first to gain access to targeted infrastructure and then to establish persistence and allow attackers to maintain remote access to the device. So whenever any ransomware or malware or Trojan or whatever talks about persistence, it's essentially a way to keep access to the system. If you have something that's only in memory, then when you restart or when you do anything at all, it generally gets wiped and even if you were just to put it to the disk, just because it's on disk doesn't mean anything, right? There has to be a way to boot it up. Auto run functionality, startup functionality. There's different ways you can do persistence on Windows and then cron jobs on Linux and stuff like that. You generally need to hook into a process that'll bring the process back to life after a reboot. So Sharp Rhino compromises systems disguised as the open source network administration tool Angry IP Scanner through typo squatting domains. So typo squatting, you have either the kind that use like Cyrillic characters or ones that are off just slightly. So think like Google with an extra O or Google with a Cyrillic character, a Cyrillic being, I believe they're Cyrillic, but characters that look very close to the English O or the English R or stuff like that, but they're actually a different character in a different language. They just happen to look very similar on the computer that you can't really tell unless you actually investigate the ASCII character or the value or hex. So because Angry IP Scanner is open source, attackers can abuse and misuse valid code signing certificates to make it look like a network admin is downloading software that has a valid certificate but is instead installing the malware according to the post. So whenever you sign something, you generally sign it to a domain. for the most part. So if they're typo squatting, they're having something that looks very close to what the domain should be, well then they can make this look like an authentic piece of software because it's signed by a quote-unquote authentic domain, even though that domain is a misrepresentation of the actual angry IP scanner. Upon execution, Sharp Rhino establishes persistence and provides the attacker with remote access to the device, which they then use to launch a typical ransomware attack using the Hive ransomware. Again, they took up the mantle from what it seems, and they're just using the average ransomware mechanisms to infect a system. Hunters International, the new threat actor, acquired the malware from its original owners, a group that disbanded after it was taken out by international law enforcement soon after its inception. So we're going to go down into the evolution. Sharp Rhino demonstrates the progression of Hunters International, a group linked to Russia. In the first 7 months of 2024, the group claimed responsibility for 134 attacks. It has quickly risen to the ascendance as the 10th most active ransomware group in 2024, thanks to its possession of Hive. Now, it's not only because they possess Hive, although the Hive ransomware is a pretty sophisticated piece of malware it's been around for a bit. So the fact they acquired it, I'm curious what kind of money was exchanged there, or maybe someone knew someone. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting thing to consider, right? Because when you look at it from a business perspective, when you acquire a defunct business, a lot of the time you're buying the assets, or the assets are getting liquidated so you can acquire it. There's, an interesting parallel between illicit business and the quote-unquote legitimate businesses. Interesting thing. Now, it does go on to say that it leverages RAS, or Ransomware as a Service. Ransomware as a Service is a pretty popular thing that's kind of sprung up recently. It's a way for threat actors to not only be able to make money and spread their malware, but now they can do it for other less sophisticated groups. So if you have a group that just has a lot of manpower or has a lot of ways into something, then they can leverage that because now they give the infrastructure, right? Think about this as you've heard software as a service, right? You go to a website and everything's on the quote unquote cloud, which is just someone else's computer. In this case, it's ransomware as a service, so it's someone else's ransomware software. The affiliates give infections, and then they take a 10, 20, 30% cut depending on what they've agreed on with the ransomware provider. In this case, the Hunters International group is the provider of the ransomware, the RAS provider. So continuing on, being a RAS provider is highly likely a main cause for their fast rise to notoriety, Fort wrote. Like many other ransomware operators, Hunters International exfiltrates data from victim organizations prior to encrypting files, then changes file extensions to the .locked and leaves a README message guiding recipients to a chat portal on the Tor network for payment instructions. Another thing you happen to see a lot with a lot of ransomware operators is they'll go on the Tor network because it's a way to, an extra layer of anonymity between the victim and the hackers. Now, the fact they're using .locked, pretty common, and the fact they're exfiltrating data is just another mechanism, right? Because, we can do a backup. Well, even if you do a backup, they can still leak all the data because they've taken a backup of it. So when you're paying them, you're kind of paying them twofold. You're paying them to not leak your data, and you're paying them to unlock the data. Now, there's nothing stopping them from still leaking it afterwards. You're taking the trust of a criminal who infected you, but that is what they do. Now, there is some interesting technological aspect behind this. The encryptor itself exhibits a sophisticated design coded in Rust, a programming language increasingly favored by cybercriminals for its security features, efficiency, and resistance to reverse engineering, Fort wrote. This tactic is in line with the evolution observed in the ransomware development, with notable examples including both Hive and Black Cat. Black Cat had the recent Alpha V ransomware before they did their exit and just kind of left their affiliates and dead in the water. Now, the fact it's resistant to reverse engineering, Rust is currently coming up as a better version of C. At least that's what a lot of developers will say it is. Rust picks up where C and C++ tend to have vulnerabilities. Rust, I believe, has managed memory and a few other features that make it a bit more safer compared to like C and C++, because you have to allocate memory and allocate pointers, and you're doing certain things which require a lot of manual things, and that's very easy to mess up. Now, that's a very oversimplification. For my developers and my programmer-esque hackers out there, you may have a bit more knowledge on this. I'm just kind of giving a general idea for those who may not know too much, but are still interested in figuring out why it's bad, or why this Rust is, an interesting language for them to use. This and Golang have kind of been the up and coming cyber criminal tool sets, because they each have their own different things, and they're either hard to detect or hard to reverse engineer. There's just a lot of cool features. C and C++, which was the mainstay for a while for a lot of malware developers, tends to have a lot of debugging, decompiler, and a lot of support in breaking down and analyzing files. Rust and Golang are newer, so their stuff isn't as well built out. Now, you also have stuff like VBA and Python scripts, but because they're scripts, they're not compiled, you can kind of just open them up and read them. There is obfuscators and stuff that converts them to .exe, at least for Python there is. I haven't touched too much VBA, but for those of you who have, do you want to leave in the comments? Can you compile VBA to an EXE? Let me know. Or if not, if you guys have touched on other stuff that can convert to EXE, or you're interested in finding out more about that, leave a comment below, and maybe I can touch on it. So, continuing with the article, disguised as legitimate software. It's a subheading. The researchers analyzed a sample of Sharp Rhino that used a valid certificate signed by the J. Golden's Drive Trading Co. Limited. The file delivered a malware was a Nullsoft Scriptable Installer System, or NSIS, packed executable, a common file that most compression tools like 7-zip can understand and read, Forward observed. So a lot of the installers are just ways to compile, and not compile, but to compress all the necessary installation files and maybe some, manipulation logic to the underlying system that you need, like installing system variables and things like that. And a lot of the installers pretty much do all that for a user, right? So when the user clicks it, it will go off, install in the program files, manipulate registries, and do other stuff, and put it into like the startup or the system variables, whatever's needed. I've done a little bit of installers before, not with Nullsoft. At least I don't believe it was Nullsoft, but it's been a while. I don't tend to mess with that too much. Now, continuing on, the installer system establishes persistent by modifying the run update Windows key registry with the shortcut for Microsoft.ini key, and establishes two directories on the C program data Microsoft called Windows Updater 24 and another called Log Update Windows to facilitate multiple channels to the Hunter's International Command and Control, or C2, which is their command and control software, as a fallback mechanism. So, some things to unpack. A C2 software, or command and control software, you can think of it as the brains of it all. If you're thinking client server, it is the malicious server that the attackers stand up, and then each of the malware infections is the client, because they will reach out and get commands and do other stuff from the C2 server. Now, there is the idea of a reverse proxy and all that, where technically the malware is the server and then the C2 server could act like a client, but we're going more into semantics there. The ultimate part of it is that a C2 server is what ransomware or other malware connects to, like botnets will connect to a C2 server, to be able to get what's known as their commands, right? What do you want me to do? Am I supposed to run? Is there new updates or new things to install or new stuff to drop on the system? Now, the fact that they're putting something into the program data Microsoft is just a way to hide things in plain sight. No one's going to go into the Microsoft file and start deleting stuff. You have the old joke of delete Win32. No one comes in here and deletes stuff. If the folder Windows Updater 24 and its contents are discovered by a security engine or professional, there exists a possibility that the persistence mechanism will remain and the device will remain infected. So even if you delete it, there might be a way to restore it. We've seen this with sophisticated malware, where even though one of the folders is deleted, the registry key or some kind of script exists to rebuild some of the necessary infrastructure on the computer. Sometimes the best thing to do is a clean install where you wipe everything from a source that is not on the computer, right? So you get a fresh USB that's never been on this infected machine and you re-image the machine. So ultimately, Sharp Rhino's purpose is an attack to give Hunter's International persistence and control over a targeted system to launch a sophisticated ransomware attack for financial gain, which the group does without prioritizing any sector or region, but instead by targeting via opportunistic means. What that all comes down to is they're trying to do this from an opportunity standpoint, right? If they can get an infection and they can squeeze some money, they'll do that. They're not trying to infect only X or Y, or the finance industry, or the oil and gas industry, or the medical industry. Whoever they can get, they'll get. And considering that they're going after IT professionals, they're going after people who have, or most likely will have, higher privileges that let them infect more systems. And they've gone to the extra lengths of typo squatting and trying to make it scientific official. They're really pulling out a lot of stops here to make infection, so they're probably wanting to make a good sizable return wherever they can. Now, the article does state that Quorum Cyber, the ones who alerted to all this, their original blog post, they've released MITRE attack mappings for the RAT's defense, innovation, discovery, privilege escalation, execution, persistent, and C2 processes. And all these are just indicators of compromise or ways to detect the malware for anyone who's using the MITRE attack mapping. I haven't been able to really dive into that. I know it's a very popular framework and used by a lot of people, but if you want to look into that, I highly recommend it. I'll be probably diving later into that to see and find out more about it. Again, I'm bringing this from a developer standpoint, from a cybersecurity enthusiast standpoint. This stuff is just really cool, but it's also very damaging. And the fact they took up a very well-known ransomware because the old operator kind of fell out because of problems with law enforcement. We'll see how long Hunters International stays around before they begin to be the new spotlight of, federal agencies or international agencies wanting to take them down. Ransomware tends to be a very damaging industry, and it tends to go noticed versus a lot of stuff tends to go unnoticed. This is one of the places where there's a lot of money and a lot of heat for whoever dares to try to make money off it. But we'll see, and time will tell to whether they'll, grab a bunch of money and then disappear, or maybe they'll get taken down. Hunters International is another threat actor we should be keeping an eye on, but it doesn't seem like they're going to be going away anytime soon. Hopefully we'll see some more interesting news, but hopefully not at the same time. Guys, I want to thank you for tuning in for another episode of Exploit Brokers. This has been Laudo, and I'll see you in the next one.